Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today's guest is the co-founder and president of America's first wax museum of African American history, the National Blacks in Wax Museum, Dr. Joanne Martin. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Rob.
So we were talking a little bit before we got started, and this is a treat. It's like literally talking to a big proponent of this thing that we have awareness around now. We're talking about like Black stories and Black history and just knowledge of Black people, and just the Great Blacks in Wax Museum has always had that reputation here for pretty much my entire life or what have you. But I'll have it come from the spokesperson, the voice, as we talked about a few minutes ago. Could you describe the work of the Great Blacks in Wax Museum and the mission?
Well, starting out, my husband, Elmer, was very much a product of his time, of the Black consciousness, Black power, civil rights era, the big afro and the Ungawa, Black power and all of that. He was on the faculty of Morgan State University, and he found that the students were complaining that learning all that Black history wasn't going to have any value. It wouldn't get you the American dream or the middle class dream or the corporate dream or whatever the dream might be, that they're not going to let you wear your dashiki and your afro, and you won't get a job if you come in for an interview. And so that was very disconcerting to my Ungawa Black Power husband, Elmer. And then to just top that off, he sponsored a Little League baseball team of Baltimore City youth. He had ID pictures taken of them so that they could play in the league. And the photographer came over, gave out the pictures, and one of the kids came up to him, angry, tears about to fall, and told Elmer that he had to make the photographer take the picture over. So Elmer said he looked at the picture, said, "Son, it's a great picture of you. Why do you want it taken over?" And the kid said, "Because they got me too Black in this picture. I don't want to be as Black as they got me in this picture." And, you know, we were the say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud generation. We were the generation that chose the name Black rather than and rejected Negro and colored. We were the generation that did that. So to have this kid talk about, and we thought we'd gotten past that with say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, and Black is beautiful, and those things. And Elmer said he sat in his office in between his classes thinking about the kids, the young adults who are rejecting this whole idea that it's not going to get you the American dream with all that Blackness. And here this kid is talking about physically being too Black. And he said he sat just almost destroyed for a while, asking himself, how did we get back to this point? And how did we get back to this point so quickly? And he said, through this process, he said, we failed to institutionalize our history, to build institutions designed solely for the purpose of preserving our history and culture. And failing that, every generation was going to have to start from scratch. And it was out of that we went to Potter's Wax Museum in Florida. Elmer and I were just fascinated by that way of telling the story. There weren't that many Black figures, and when they did, they had, we were all the same color. Yeah. We all looked alike, and no matter what we did, whether we were sitting under a tree or working, toiling away in the fields, we looked shiny, shiny Black. Yeah. And all of those things that distinguish us from the very dark to the very light and everything in between, none of that was depicted in that museum. And then figures that we knew were Black, that you still get as being depicted as white. And so we all of that was concerning to us, but nevertheless, just the fact that for me, there have been no faces on our history, and especially at that time. And so the idea that the wax medium puts a face on our history and it gives it an up closeness. That's why you don't see our figures aren't behind glass and so forth, because we want that whole idea of the closeness of a history that someone decided to make remote or neglect or distort. So a number of the choices that we made about making sure that we try to find out what the skin color is, what the hair texture is, what all of those things that define us as who we are and the unique people that we are.
That is great to hear that, because in multiple mediums and having that attention to detail, it can only come from a Black person, if we're being honest about it. Because
yes.
You'll watch certain things on like television or film or what have you, and it's supposed to be from a certain era. Let's say it's from the 70s, the 80s, or 90s. And it's like, yeah, we had the afros or the hot top fades or what have you. And it's like, these wigs are bad. There was not a Black person consulted on these. And when you definitely seeing the depictions of race, and Black people make up a tapestry. Like, we have so many different colors. It's a spectrum of brown. And when you see it, it's like, that person doesn't look like that. But seeing that your museum has just that attention to detail, like, no, we have to get this right, because we know.
Absolutely. And for Elmer and for me, we feel, and I feel he felt that we were being entrusted with the story and with the history and someone's legacy. And that you could have people think that everyone in a wax museum is dead. We would point out, President Obama is very much alive. And Rosa Parks, when she was on her 75th anniversary tour, she came to the museum. Pointed out that she loved her wax figure, but she had been wearing glasses all of her life, and she was wearing glasses on that fateful event, and that if we would put glasses on her, and we just opened up the day before, mm-hmm. her glasses were behind the counter, and in our rush to open and whatever, we forgot to put on her glasses, and there she was saying, if you put my glasses on, I'll be happier, and it'll be more authentic. And so we ran and got the glasses and put them on. But the point is that you can have people standing there next to their wax figure, yeah. And if you don't, God forbid, want them to say, well, who is that supposed to be? So, and again, being entrusted with the history, with the legacy, and trying to be respectful of that. So,
and thank you for sharing that. So I'm looking at, you gave me your great bio in the background, so this helped me with my questions. So I read that the museum began as a traveling show with just 4 figures in the van. Who are the historic figures that were in the van, and are those figures still part of the museum?
They are still a part of the museum. We had Mary McLeod Bethune and Frederick Douglass. They were. We got 2 more so quickly that it's kind of hard to separate them out. But those were the absolute first 2, and then John Brown and Nat Turner. Because Elmer wanted it to be, John Brown, even though he and Frederick Douglass communicated and Frederick Douglass knew some of what his plans were. They're still very different individuals. Sure. And Nat Turner, very different individual. They're being insurrectionists and so forth. So he didn't want the first 4 to be of the same pattern and ideology and that you have the perception that people have of them. So those were the first 4. They occupied, I never know what word, I don't want to say they lived in. They occupied the guest bedroom of our 2-bedroom apartment. So if you'd come in and looked in the guest bedroom of our 2-bedroom apartment, you would have found Mary McLeod Bethune's head on the dresser and Frederick Douglass's torso in the corner, and Nat Turner someplace occupying his space, and John Brown And Elmer began as an artist. He began collecting so much stuff that we got to a point where you'd have to push the door of our guest bedroom open as far as you could, and then pitch things in there. So I developed a good baseball arm.
I like it.
A little pitching arm. But that, and I just began to say, this is Mary McLeod has got to go. She's got to find her own space. She can no longer occupy the guest bedroom of my apartment. So, but that was our very humble beginning. We took money that we were saving to make a down payment on a house. Our relatives would run away from us when they saw us coming because they knew we were going to have the hat and taking up the collection, but. And we, ate a lot of lima beans and whatever, but just trying to make this happen.
It's very important work, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm a Morgan alum as well, class of '07 or what have you. So it's I just remember one of the most rewarding and interesting classes, and I wish that there was more, and I wish that I had the consideration that I have now. But the class was the African diaspora class, and we had just a dope professor. And I was like, all of this is cool. Why isn't this taught more often? Why do I know about all of these, these wars and things like that? Why don't I just learn about Black people?
Yes.
So in that class, and this is actually a segue to this next question that I have for you. In that class, I learned about just different people and people that I'm like, I want to learn more about their story. And because you kind of look for people that you kind of not necessarily look up to, but they're facets of them. It's like, that's interesting. They lived an interesting life. When you were growing up, were there any role models or people that you recall like heroes for you and your upbringing?
Well, I think about this. I grew up in the segregated South. We had Negro History Week. And when that was over, it was over. Right. And then you went back to the textbooks that had been chosen for you by the white male school board. And so there wasn't there wasn't a whole lot about slavery, or when I talk about there not being a face on history, Booker T. Washington was probably the most powerful man of his day. Mm-hmm. And in the cafeteria of my school, Bryan Academy, named for a Black man named James Bryan, there was a picture of someone I recognized as Mary McLeod Bethune, because she created a school in Florida. George Washington Carver. And the third picture was, in my 8-year-old mind, Mr. Costin, the bus driver. Now, it never occurred to me that there might not be a logical reason for Mr. Costin, the bus driver, to be on a wall with Mary McLeod Bethune and George Washington Carver. It was with the museum that I found out that the picture, that the person that I thought was Mr. Costin, the bus driver, was actually Booker T. Washington.
Oh, wow.
And I had never, again, he was the most important and powerful man of his day. Yeah. And I didn't know what he looked like. In fact, when I went home once, after Elmer and I had gotten married, and we went to a little town in Florida by the name of Leslie, and I showed Mr. Costin, we went to visit them, and I showed him the picture from our brochure of Booker T. Washington, and he said, "Happy dog, that do look like me."
That's great.
So, but again, no faces to the history, either the history itself not being told, or being revisionist, mm-hmm. or just having no faces to it. But fortunately for me, my role models were people like my father. My father, who wanted to be a mechanical engineer. Black men of Yulee, Florida, where I'm from, they worked in the mills, the pulp mills, the paper mills. Mm-hmm. And that was considered to be a good job. They were never going to make the same amount of money as the white men who worked there. And they were certainly never going to rise as supervisors and so forth at that time. But my father wanted to be a mechanical engineer. He came home one day with this restaurant window fan. We'd see him out there manipulating this thing, and one day he had built a board over it or whatever, and he pushed in some push things, and he pushed it in the yard, got some extension cords, and started to mow our lawn with his what my brother called his restaurant window lawnmower.
Wow.
So that and our yard looked like a used car lot because everybody bought their car to my father to work on. So my father went to the Navy, thinking that the Navy of the United States of America would provide him with the opportunity that the state of Florida and Nassau County would not.
Right. Black
men of his age, the Navy made them servants. My father was made a cook. And, they were, those were the kinds of jobs they had. Even they were servants, even to young white men who were the same age and rank.
Right.
So for me, my father lived Langston Hughes's Let America Be America Again, and the America never was America to me. Part of that, he understood that. That was the Navy makes you a cook. But the Let America Be America Again for my father was that back in Florida, he went to the polls every election, knowing that he was going to be voting for the lesser of two or three evils.
Right.
But he went to the polls, he and his friends talked politics and so forth, because for him, the Let America Be America Again was the promise of America, the ideal that is America, the hope that is America. And so very much for me, a role model. My father, with his 5 years of schooling, not education, because he had more education than 5 years, but 5 years of schooling, I would crawl up in his lap and he'd read to me from the pages of Popular Mechanics about nuts and bolts and whatever. And so he gave me an appreciation of reading. So I don't know that I understood him to be a role model then, but I most certainly understand that now.
That's wonderful. And I think oftentimes we have these kind of grandiose ideas of who a role model might be, and it's someone that's more remote. But sometimes it's right there in your house. They're making like a lawnmower out of a fan, or or just tucking you in, or whatever the thing is, and they're doing the things that are right. So I want to talk about a few things within the museum and a few of the things that you've co-authored. So I want to talk about those real quick. So let's see. Like as we talked about a little bit before starting, I was in awe of the craftsmanship of the wax figures. What is that process of creating the figures? And secondly, is like that other bullet point there, what are some of the challenges in maintaining those wax figures?
Well, when Elmer died in 2001, because he was the artist, then he guided the process. Okay. I can remember that we were in Egypt when he died, and what he said in Egypt was that when he got back to Baltimore, he had to work on the Benjamin Hooks wax figure because there was just something wrong with it. I mean, not work on it in the sense of crafting it, but with the artist. Just having him the details were off. When Elmer died, two of the worst wax figures that we had came when I had to take over the process. And Elmer would have done so much better. But what I am proud of now is that the best wax figures that we have, one of them, for example, is our Frederick Douglass. And I guided that process. I've been guiding the process. Elmer died in 2001. Around 2003, I had gotten it right. I was able to see what Elmer saw and to bring out those kinds of details and make decisions like having the big hair for Frederick Douglass, because that hair says for me, agitate. But so choosing, not just making sure that we get the image right, but sometimes how you're going to display it. Those things are important. Mahalia Jackson, another excellent wax figure, where she's singing and she has a mouth. It's clear that she's singing. She's looking upward and so forth. So that's a part of what goes into it. Our most criticized wax figure is Martin Luther King. Okay. Because we went for a young Martin Luther King when he was about 27, 28 years old. Mm-hmm. We wanted to make the point that this man gave up his life. At 26 years old, I would not want to be trying to lead a movement and have the whole race on my shoulder. But those are the decisions that he made. And so you see him. People recognize Martin Luther King when he was near his death, actually, because he died so young, right. Relative. And they don't. They recognize a Martin Luther King who, with the movement, and there was a beginning to show on his face and his body and so forth. A young Martin Luther King, you don't see that. I mean, it looks like Martin Luther King to me, but anyway, when you get little kids come in and say, "Mommy, mommy, who is that?" If they don't know Martin Luther King, you've got to do something else. But those sometimes are the decisions that we've made. Our Sojourner Truth, she doesn't have the bonnet on her head. And, you see, you have this one image of Sojourner Truth. And I'd like to think that Sojourner Truth didn't wear this bonnet. Maybe a 10-year-old Sojourner Truth didn't have a bonnet rag on her head. Yeah. But, sometimes when we try to get people out of that, this is the only image of this person, because they get stuck in just not understanding the full impact of this person, because they're looking only at a certain very small window of that person.
Absolutely. I remember one of the things we were talking about when just becoming aware of like Black History Month, and that would be, unless you sought it out, unless it's being talked about in your home as a more broad thing, it was just literally in school, here's your 3 people, choose wisely. And I being in a Black home, I was like, there are more than 3 famous Black people, or it's only these pieces that are of the person that are maybe the sanitized, or the ones that can be raised, or the ones that can be modified to meet a certain means. And I'll say over the last few MLK days, I'll acknowledge that people have made the point of, don't just say one quote. Don't just say this one thing because it suits your need at this point. It's like, or pull out someone else. We're deeper than that. We're deeper than MLK in his 30s. And as you pointed out, it's like your figure is him in his 20s. And it's like, it's broader than that. And that's the thing that I think people fail on. And it just shows I think, limitation on how a long, rich history of Black people has been not really spoken about at the length it should be.
Exactly. And, it was his view on the Vietnam War that began to get him in disfavor with any number of people. So you're absolutely right. We have a tour guide training program where we teach our youth works youth to be tour guides. And what I'm always trying to get them to see is not, some of them will come in complaining that, this is just like school. And then at the end of the program, they will apologize. But they're also saying, well, all we know about is Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and whatever. And why aren't we learning about the other people that you have here? Right. So those things make a difference, too.
Yeah, it's something out there for everyone. Like I say it really unabashed and kind of, I can be a little ignorant about it, I'll admit. Like, we drive the culture. We always have. So it's not like, as I said before, it's not 3 or 4 Black people. We have lots, and we have various areas in which we've contributed and we've not gotten our flowers, and we need to be acknowledged at a minimum in terms of like what's being taught, because it's crucial. And I think a lot of the work that you're doing, it's kind of, at least a lot of people that I know that are from here and that are from this local area have gone there, and that's where they get that broader like level of like Black history or Black historical knowledge. So I read that you've co-authored many publications involving the Black family, Black women, and racial and cultural diversity. Which areas within Black culture do you think have the most opportunity for more discussion, especially now, especially in like 2021?
Well, I think that just getting a sense of our resilience. The first book that Elmer and I wrote was the Black Extended Family, and it came out of his research as a PhD student at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. And what we were told at the time was that our work was groundbreaking because the Black extended family was being described by social scientists as pathological. That was the word that they used, because it didn't fit the nuclear family model.
Right.
So what we were saying about the Black extended family is that social scientists talk about it as this Walton type structure with John, that family where you have several generations living in the same household. That was the extended family that the social scientists accepted. They didn't see it as healthy, but much more healthy than ours. And we're saying it can cross geographical lines, right, so that you can have this family in North Carolina, where the dominant family figure, as we describe this person. And I encourage people to go relook at the movie Soul Food. Yeah. Because that's a typical extended family, Black extended family, as we describe it in the book, with the concepts like dominant family figure and transfer of dominance and fictive kinship and those kinds of things. But crossing crossing geographical lines, so that you've got this family in North Carolina. There are any number of men who know that someone sent them down to grandma in the South because they were going to get into trouble. And the grandmother would, in particular, grandfather too, would say, "Send that boy down here." Yeah. So we could get him right. Or you've got families that maybe live on the same block and they shop together. They help each other, sharing food stamps or whatever. Help a man in Baltimore County an uncle who takes the kids from the city to baseball games and basketball games or whatever, to sports events, having that kind of interaction in our family, and the fact that has made for our survival. And so all of our books have been about the Black family, the Black community, as you indicated. The helping tradition is a very, very important part of what we discuss. And we look at the women's club movement, for example. When you look at the suffrage movement, it was very much a part of the women's club movement, where Black women were out there fighting on the front lines of battle, fighting for the right to vote, fighting for our youth, and so forth. The mutual aid tradition and things like that, but that have made for our survival in this country.
And I think that's always an ongoing thing, because as what comes out of these sort of conversations and the subject matter as a whole is like, it's never discussed enough for it to be the norm. It's discussed for, a few months, like, in 2020, we had a bunch of stuff that happened during the summer in the middle of a pandemic that thought we were done with that, or thought we're fine, or pandemic didn't stop, systemic racism and police brutality and, those old things. And we still have it. And it's just that thing where when people talk about why does it have to be about race? Like, why isn't it? Like,
exactly.
Okay. So now, and this has been like tremendous. And I have one last question, because I know that there are, from what I've read, there are movements happening and updates and expansion happening. So what is the thinking in opening a museum and, in this area and expanding over the next like few years? I read that there are it's movements towards that part of Baltimore, actually my neighborhood, of expanding and making the museum space a larger space. So what was the thinking in settling in Baltimore and the thinking in expanding at this point?
Well, Elmer, almost his mantra, two things. He said, conventional wisdom all over this nation is that you hide your poverty areas. And once you succeed in hiding them, then you can succeed in neglecting them. But that we were going to create a museum right in the heart of an African American community and show that tourism can thrive in a non-traditional setting. Most of our visitors come from out of state. And they ask questions like, after Great Blacks in Wax, what else is there to see? We had a group coming from somewhere in the South. They were on their way to Howard, where I'm an alum, on their way to Howard, and they took for a choir concert and competition. And they came to, they reserved a tour of the museum. There were 150 of them at least. And so we had Terra Cafe to come in, and we divided them into two groups. And so half of them were at the museum on the tour, and the other half were in our mansion facility with Terrence and his staff serving them dinner, and we did the switch off. We have an extended tour that takes you to Reginald Lewis Museum and Hampton Mansion in Baltimore County in Towson. So showing that tourism can thrive in our area, and what we want the leaders of the city to see is that since we're showing that people will come from New York or in spring break from Florida or wherever to a museum that's on the corner of North Avenue and North Avenue and Bond Street, that's an opportunity to create jobs and businesses and so forth.
Right.
And that's what we've been fighting for and trying to get people to have the vision of what we can do as a tourist destination, and changing the way we look at the economy and what works and so forth.
That's great, and that's wonderful. It's a wonderful idea in that I just agree with it. Like, you have just this idea that there's only one Baltimore and it's only the Inner Harbor, and it's like, well, my belief is always this. Everything worth your attention is in the city, and it's not centered around where the water is at and where the ballparks are at. It's here, it's everywhere. You'll find all types of pockets. And in part, that's why I kind of do this podcast, to show that we got interesting people everywhere. It's not, again, it goes back to, it's not three people. We've got interesting people, and we have interesting places, such as the Great Blacks in Wax Museum, everywhere in Baltimore. And I'm just really privileged and glad to have had this opportunity to speak with you today. And this is where I wrap up. And this is a thing that I like to offer. I like to offer all of my guests an opportunity to shamelessly plug anything, whether it be the museum, whether it be your social media, or anything that you just want to promote real quick. You have the floor. Well,
we a number of amazing youth who are part of our youth programs. So I encourage parents to contact us about some of the opportunities. We, as I mentioned earlier, we train our youth to be tour guides, and they are amazing. This year we in 2019 and 2020, and on into the future, we train them to be motor coach guides, and to do a motor coach tour. In 2019, it was physical. In 2020, it was virtual. But the kids learn so much, and they are so capable and just amazing. And I thoroughly enjoy what I have been blessed to do with our youth. And so this whole notion of Baltimore as this negative place, and people aren't looking at the children that surround us and make our lives worthwhile.
And where they can check that information out is on just everything. The update would be on www.greatblacksandwax.org. And that's where everything will be at? Yes.
And on Facebook and Twitter as well.
That's wonderful. And I'm just happy that I was able to talk to you. And I admire the work that's going on there and has been going on there since the 80s. I mean, it's great. It's expansion. It's great. And it's a treasure to Baltimore City. So again, I want to thank you for coming on to this podcast. This has been very much a treat for me.
Thank you so much. I'm humbled and honored that you reached out to me and felt that I might have something worthwhile to say. So thank you.
You totally did. Thank you so much. So for Dr. Joanne Martin from the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum, I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, Black history, Black art, Black culture in and around Baltimore. You just have to look for it.